Good afternoon, everyone. We'll give it another minute or so just to let everyone else trickle in, but welcome. Those of you who are just joining now, we're just going to give it another minute or so to get everyone into the room. All right, well, I think we'll make a start. So welcome, everyone. This is our second official HELA Research Cooperative webinar. So it's great for you that you're all here. The first one, if you missed it, was run by my colleague and co-chair of HELA, John Burton. This one, we've got myself, Adam Hill, and I'm joined by my colleague Ian Wiggins at the University of Nottingham. And the idea here is as in the first webinar, we talked more broadly about the HELA Initiative, specifically looking at how HELA certification can be applied in practice, where we highlighted the first HELA certified tour, which is the Biffy Clyro tour, currently happening worldwide. This webinar, we're focusing on the research side, which is the newer bit of HELA that's just launched. So this is the Healthy Ears Limited Annoyance Research Cooperative. And Ian and I really are here today to give you an idea of what this is all about, and probably most importantly, how all of you, hopefully, in this meeting can get involved in some way, even if you've had no experience whatsoever in research in the past. Now, as I'm presenting here, I can't really see the chat, so I'm looking to Ian to keep an eye on the chat. But maybe as a starting point, if you're so inclined, pop in the chat just who you are, kind of where you're from. Are you an academic? Do you work for a manufacturer? Are you sort of an engineer kind of on the ground doing live events? Are you some other stakeholder? But let us know who you are, because it'd be really useful to know who is in the room, and it'll help Ian and I steer our discussion later on in the webinar. So we're going to start out with something that I hadn't tried until a couple weeks ago, but I was encouraged to add a little bit of an autobiographical element to a recent talk. I was a bit skeptical of it, really. It's not something I've ever done before, but actually it went over really well. I was at an event in London a couple weeks ago. So I've decided to roll that into this talk, if you don't mind, but I think it may be useful in kind of explaining my journey going from a kid who just likes screaming into microphones and seeing what happened to the speakers to an academic who studies audio engineering and acoustics, and how I got there and how it relates to the live event sector and to research. So bear with me for a few minutes. You can kind of get a world whistle-stop tour of how I got from point A to B. But that maybe will help set the scene for what we're going to talk about after that, which is obviously research as it pertains to the live event sector. So here we go. So join me as we go back to the 1980s. So that's me. So roughly 1988, might have been 87, might have been 89. Can't know for sure. But that's me in the attic of the family home. My dad well, I think he still wishes that he became a rock star, but it never happened. But nonetheless, he more or less has hoarded speakers and guitars and amplifiers, probably since he was at university himself. So yeah, that was me figuring out what in the world happened when I talked into this microphone, which I think was the precursor to the Shure SM57s. This was a Unidyne something or other. I'm sure my dad still has it. But yeah, kind of talking into a mic plugged into these big PV stacks. If you got a sharp eye, you can see a Roland Space Echo there in the corner. That still exists. It still sitting in my dad's basement. So one day I'll get my hands on it. But this is how I started. I was surrounded by this stuff. I was surrounded by someone who still very much has a hobby. My parent, wanting to be active in music and had a band. So it just got me interested early on in this whole sound and music thing. But obviously at that stage, I wasn't educated in this. Certainly didn't have an engineering qualification. My hearing was tip top. Probably one of the few points in my life when there was nothing odd going on with my hearing. And certainly at that stage, no research questions to speak of, although certainly some curiosity. But that was the starting point. Fast forward another 10 years. So now I've sort of followed the path that my dad was following as when he was a teenager. I was convinced in the late 90s that I was just going to be a musician. That was it. I wasn't so concerned about going to university. Had a kind of marginal interest in what was happening, what the sound engineers were doing at the gigs I was playing. But as far as I was concerned, I could play the guitar, I could play drums, could play bass, play piano. I'm just going to be a musician. That sounded good. Um, of course, at this point, no education aside from high school, so no university qualification, no engineering qualification. Hearing issues, mm, maybe not at this point, but there's certainly the noticeable ringing in my ears after a gig. My friends and I played virtually every day. We played very loud, usually crammed into my friend Noah, who's on the screen there playing the drums, in his basement. Very smartly, his parents soundproofed their basement so they could just chuck us down there, play as loud as we wanted, and we wouldn't annoy anyone else. But there was sort of temporary ringing in my ears after that. I don't think it was permanent at that point, but maybe a sign of things to come. And I wasn't thinking about research at all. It just wasn't on my agenda at all. Just thinking about playing music and doing that forever. Well, fast forward a few years, I'm not playing music anymore, at least not trying to do it professionally. At this point, early 2000s, I'd fallen into being a live sound engineer. I hadn't studied it. I'd just kind of fallen into it because a friend of a friend of a friend owned a sound company and said, yeah, we'll give you a shot. We'll throw you in the deep end and see if you can survive. So yeah, this was one of the first festivals that I did. I was doing monitors for this one, and yeah, my beloved Midas Heritage 3000, which I think has been sitting in the company's warehouse for years now, just collecting dust. But at the time, it was the desk he wanted to be mixed on. But yeah, this was a festival at Northwestern University, so just north of Chicago, right on the lakefront. It was freezing that day. You never quite know what you're going to get in May in Chicago. That's what I'd fallen into. I wasn't educated in this. I was learning as I went, so still no education, no university qualification, no engineering qualification. But the hearing issues were there. And I don't pretend them to be major hearing issues, but the tinnitus all of a sudden had stuck. So I had around about 16 kilohertz tone in my ears, just always there. And that's been there still to this day. That's been with me. I'm fortunate that it's never progressed since then. It's still quite subtle. If I'm in a quiet environment, I can just about hear it. Beyond that, it's not a problem. But at that stage, I kind of realized, okay, I'm doing all this stuff, all the sound work. It's very loud, and my ears are starting to show certain early signs that something's gone wrong, at least going wrong. So that was already kind of when I started to flag that. Now, interestingly, at this point, we were talking research with my colleagues, but we didn't see it as such. It was one of those things where we had, the odd moment at a gig saying, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? Or have you ever thought about this? So we didn't consider ourselves researchers. We just had these ideas that we had no time or means to explore beyond just trying kind of interesting mic techniques and things like that, things that you can do as a sound engineer with what you have available. But that was sort of the start, transitioning from thinking I'm going to be a musician to thinking I'm going to be a sound engineer. That was early 2000s. 10 years later, so the 20 teens, if you want to call it that, still doing live sound work. It's gotten a bit bigger. So I think it's Ford Field, so that's in Detroit. So it's a big arena gig. You can see the mixing desk has shrunk. So I think underneath that dust cloth is it's a Yamaha CL5. I think that was fairly new at the time. Um, and the amps have shrunk and speakers have all shrunk. It's gotten much easier in terms of the technology and what you're using. At this point, I did finally have a university qualification. Actually, in that span of 10 years, I had managed to get an undergrad, master's, and PhD, but still was very much doing the live sound work. But at that point, I was started transitioning into academia, having started at the University of Derby in 2012. So certainly ticked the box with the university qualification. I had a formal education. I wouldn't consider myself a proper engineer yet, though. I didn't have an engineering qualification. So, whereas I'd say I work in engineering, I might not be able to say that I'm a proper engineer just yet. At least in my mind, it didn't. But maybe that's me being overly strict. The tinnitus was still there. That was largely the only hearing issue at that point. So, still no other major issues, still the slight ringing in my ear. That's it. But all of a sudden, having started to work in academia and having gone through all the research degrees, I have research questions. And already at that point, I think I had more research questions that I had time to address. So kind of fully in the system and fully capable of tackling research questions. I had the confidence to do it at that point. And then finally, we get to present day, where the only extra tick mark I've got here is that in the past 5 or 6 years, I've managed to become a chartered engineer. And in my mind, that means I've kind of ticked that box. I can actually call myself an engineer at this point. I've jumped through enough hoops, have enough experience, good enough track record, I think, to be considered a kind of capital E engineer. But now I'm very much moved into the academic realm. I don't necessarily consider myself a live sound engineer anymore. I do the occasional bit of work, but kind of academia has taken over my working life. So where I'm at now is I'm very much a researcher. I come up with research questions. I can get funding for research. I can work out proper research methods. I'm confident enough to run a research project from A to B. But if you go back to here, when I'm spending virtually all my time working in industry, I had the ideas, but I had no idea about research methods, certainly no idea about how to get funding for research, and wouldn't know where to start to actually manage a research project. And I think that's one of the things we're going to focus on in the rest of this webinar is trying to, I suppose, encourage you who are out in industry, to encourage you that you can be involved in research. It's more about building a team together to get academic representation, get manufacturers involved, get you as what I'd call the end user, the person actually on the ground doing the work, kind of contributing to real world meaningful research. So that's going to be the topic of the rest of this webinar. So, and I realize that Ian's been sitting very patiently, bearing with me and talking through my life's journey. But I sort of put this question to all of you in the room and to Ian. But it's asking, why do we love live music? What is it that keeps all these thousands, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people coming to these events time and time again? What is it? What are we trying to capture here? What is this product that people love? So if you have any thoughts yourself, pop them into the chat. But I'll turn it over to Ian. Do you have thoughts on this? Why we love live music? Why do you love live music?
Thanks, Adam. And hi, everybody. Thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. Great to meet you all. I'm afraid I haven't produced a Who Am I series of slides yet. Still trying to figure that one out, I think. Yeah, like Adam, I from a young age was involved in live music, playing in bands, classic pub venues with acoustic drum cymbals right behind my head and amplifiers on beer crates to bring them up so I could hear myself and getting absolutely blasted. when my ears were very young and tender. And I've been reasonably fortunate, I think. I haven't suffered too badly, at least yet, with hearing issues, but I suspect some low-level damage has probably been done along the way that is going to creep up on me as life goes on. Yeah, so just to briefly introduce myself, yeah, early interest in music. My first sort of real job after many non-real jobs was working as an acoustic consultant at Sandy Brown Associates in London. So doing acoustic consultancy for the whole variety of different venues. Some of it the interesting stuff in concert halls and studios, and other parts of it the schools and apartment blocks and everything that gets built. But yeah, real interest in acoustics, long-standing interest in sound, and then I moved up to Nottingham about 15 or 16 years ago to do a PhD in hearing science, and got a little bit more into the medical side, looking at hearing health and individuals' experiences of sound and hearing loss, and really was very focused there for several years as a researcher, working on sort of brain imaging and understanding how the auditory system works and what can go wrong with it. And then it was through being invited to take part in the World Health Organization's Make Listening Safe initiative that I sort of got back into, reignited the interests in live sound. And working with the WHO, I was the lead author of their global standard for safe listening venues and events. And it's through this process that I have met Adam, and we started collaborating on different research projects in this area. We now co-supervise a PhD student who's actively researching these topics. So yeah, it's a really interesting time. There's loads of research now starting to happen in this area, where research has probably been somewhat sporadic over the years, and things like the HELA Research Co-op providing some dedicated funding and strategic funding is a really good way forward, I think. Fully agree with Adam that you don't have to be a researcher to be involved in research. And in particular, it's the sort of hands-on knowledge, that's so crucial. One of the biggest problems with research is that often it's the researchers who decide what to study, and they do it in isolation and they write it up and talk to one another, but the impact isn't always felt on the ground. And that's why having so many different stakeholders involved in research is crucial. Particularly in the medical field, there's great effort now into making sure that patients are involved at every stage of research so that everything is relevant to their experience and can actually benefit them. But the same is true in other fields, and in this field that means everybody from audience members to people in the industry, event organizers, regulators, health and safety people, policymakers. We really need everybody involved for this to carry value. Okay, thank you. That was my brief bio. Why do we love live music? I don't know. I'm interested to hear what everybody in the audience feels, but I think one thing that we have to acknowledge is that a big part of it is the sort of physical sensation of loud sound, the impact that you get at these kind of events that, even with your nicely curated home hi-fi, you still don't get the same visceral experience as the kind of sound levels that we experience at live events. So there is that sort of inherent conflict, really, from a health and safety perspective of people go because they like the loud sound, but the loud sound can also be damaging, is damaging. So we have to find that balance. There are plenty of walks of life where people enjoy potentially dangerous activities, but do so in a way that's sort of somewhat controlled and looks after their health and well-being. And that's what we would like the audio industry to do too. So yeah, for me, it's just that it's getting everybody together, it's being in a shared space, a shared experience, and just, as somebody who's always been passionate about sound, it's the sense that brings me the most satisfaction, and I think that's probably shared with many other people in this audience.
And I think kind of drawing on one of the things you just said there, Ian, it's a very different experience to listening on your hi-fi or over earphones at home or wherever you may be. If you think about sitting at home listening to music, it's very much it's engaging your ears. That's generally it. Whereas if you go to a live event, I think what makes it so great and why we love it is that it's a multi-sensory experience. You're not just getting the sound to your ears, you're feeling the sound with your whole body. So kind of the haptic response, I think, is really important. And for me, going to events, not talking about working it, but going just as an audience member, it's feeling that. That's what's exciting for me. It's kind of exciting more than just your ears. And then on top of that, you have the lighting and the video elements, which these days are just awe-inspiring what they're doing. It's no longer just a band standing on stage playing their songs. It's this whole experience which really engages you completely. You can't ignore it. You can't tune it out. You're there just immersed in this. And I think that's a lot of what's coming in. I see on the chat, kind of an immersive experience where it's just all consuming, which hopefully in a good way. I know that's one thing that my colleague John Burton is working on in his research, trying to understand what is the appropriate level and how do we do this in a positive way, without going to dangerous levels, as Ian was talking about. But also, I mean, I see that Eldon in the chat mentioned a collective live experience. From the research that I've done looking into this, in studies that have surveyed people about why they keep going to live events, that comes up time and time again. It's more the social nature of it. The fact that you kind of have this shared immersive experience with this sea of people you're within, kind of makes you feel as one, feel like you belong. But also, if you're having a bad day, week, month, year, it just gives you an escape. Due to this kind of sensory stimulation, you're able to just switch off and tune out from all the other noise in your life and pay attention to this noise in a sense. Yeah, Ian, go ahead.
Thanks, Adam. I just thought I'd pick up on a couple of the things that have come through in the chat, stimulated a couple of thoughts for me. One is Andy mentioning there, empowering the audience to have a lifelong experience. And that's such an important part, the healthy ears part of HELA. We all want live music, live events to thrive. And that means looking after your audience so that they keep coming back, because their ears are intact to the point that they can still enjoy live sound. And there's something in there too about, these experiences and looking after the audience. And there's been some interesting research from collaborators of ours in Australia looking at audience attitudes towards sound levels at live events. And, the takeaway message from that was that it's quite often the case that the bulk of the audience would prefer it not quite as loud as it is. So we should really make sure that we're serving audiences. Which brings me also onto Dan's point about this sort of positive feedback loop where the sound engineer and everybody involved is part of this collective system. And something kind of magical happens. And what I wanted to say there from thinking about the HELA Research Co-op is there are a lot of problems still to solve. And I guess what we would all want is that everybody doing their job in this setting can focus on that positive, artistic, musical aspect. And you want the tools to get out of the way and just make that easy for you. And you don't want the sound engineer to be fighting against poor acoustics or compliance with limits that aren't working properly, or they're being measured at the wrong location or using the wrong type of acoustic parameter. So I think there's a lot of ways that the technologies and the systems can be improved to facilitate that sort of holistic artistic experience and get out of people's ways so that they can do that.
And I think that very nicely leads on to my next question. So thank you for the nice segue, Ian. But I think we've established the various reasons why we love live music, and I think it's no secret that it's an industry that's been around for I mean, millennia, arguably. I mean, you go back 1,000, 2,000 years, there were still centers within, heavily populated areas where you could go to consume the arts and see performances. And that really hasn't changed. It's just the performance, the nature of the performances we do has changed a bit, and we obviously have a bit more technology these days. So it's not something that's going anywhere. And actually, I was talking about this to my students yesterday in the context of noise pollution. And one of them just raised his hand and said, "Man, it would be depressing if our venues all shut and this all disappeared." I said, "Well, absolutely. It's a fundamental part of our communities." So it emphasizes in my mind how research has to fit in to this. I think from a live event engineer's point of view, it's very much a mindset of the show must go on. You're dealing with very tight time frames. You don't have time to stop and really ponder these broader research questions. And I think what we're trying to do here is to try to enable academia and the industry to work together a bit more to allow the academics to tackle the slower moving, more methodical elements of the research, but the industry to feed back to actually drive the research and make sure that it's meaningful and useful to the industry. So, I mean, it's all these things that Ian's already been talking about. If you're a sound engineer, you need to make sure that the sound level limits that are imposed on you are clear. So it's not just saying you have a 100 dB limit. You're saying, well, what's the weighting? What's the time averaging? How are you measuring it? Where are you measuring it from? All of these things need to be defined. And I suspect, especially when it comes to C weighting, there's a lot of research that needs to be done. Having worked with Ian with the WHO on their standard, they won't put anything in writing unless it's evidence-based and backed up by proper research. So we talked about, oh, can we do a proper C-weighted limit to encompass, the full spectrum that we get at live events, including the bass and representative our hearing sensitivities at concert levels? And the answer was no, we can't do that because there hasn't been proper research done on it yet. So we just don't know. In talking to touring engineers, when there is a C-weighted limit in place, it can really hamper their mix because they end up riding the fader all day because it's a number that was just chosen arbitrarily, from my experience, and just makes it difficult to do their job and meet the audience's expectations. So, yeah, how do we all fit in this? It goes back to conversations I had quite a few years ago with a colleague, Elena Shabalina. At the time, she was with D&B. Now she's at the Technical University of Munich. But she was kind of going on about the fact that she's working at a manufacturer at the time, but she also had a foot in academia, and she also had another foot, so she has 3 feet, as a systems engineer, working at live events. And from her perspective, and I agree with this, my experience has been the same, there's not such good communication and collaboration between those three. You can say that the manufacturers are quite good interfacing with the end users, the people doing putting on the events, but the end users certainly aren't in regular or any contact with academics. The manufacturers sometimes might occasionally pop their heads into a university and have a chat, but examples of that are few and far between in my experience. So what Elena was saying was that, look, this seems to be an obvious opportunity to start linking up academics with manufacturers, with end users, because inevitably it's going to make for better results, better research, better outcomes, and generally just fill in these gaps in knowledge that we have in the industry and solve practical problems. So I think everyone here in this room, I mean, I recognize some of the names. I see we have academics in here, we have people from manufacturers, we have people as stakeholders in industry, end users. You all have a role to play in research, whether you like it or not. You have meaningful input to put in, and I think that's what we're trying to encourage and kind of start getting you thinking about this within this webinar. Does that all make sense? Ian, have I covered everything in this area, or anyone else in the room?
It makes sense to me, Adam, but you're probably preaching to the converted. If I may just add a couple of thoughts as well on the back of that. Yeah, so in the research, I was just going to pick up on the fact that in the hearing health side of this, especially, which is the area that I predominantly work in, one thing that's worth noting is that it's a really tricky area to research because there are clear ethical issues about you can't bring volunteers into the lab and blast them at these kind of sound levels, knowing that you're putting their hearing at risk. So it's sort of out of necessity, then you're driven towards quite innovative research methodologies where you're sort of finding ways to do this research more opportunistically at venues and at events where people are themselves already going to this sort of high sound exposure environment. But then you've got all these interesting questions about how do you control the exposure and how do you monitor it and how do you equate all the different uncontrolled variables in these kind of very lively settings. So it's a really interesting area to be in from a research perspective. And I think, as Adam says, that's one of the reasons why everybody has a role to play, because you can't do research in the field in that way unless you have the collaboration of the systems engineers and sound engineers and the venue and event organizers. So it really requires everybody to work together. Just to motivate as well why we need research in this area, as Adam said, having been involved in writing the WHO standard, there is an evidence base there which we lent upon in developing the standard, but there's also an awful lot that we don't know yet. And as Adam mentioned, the sort of low frequency exposure question, the evidence base primarily is drawn from sort of noise at work domain, and everything is A-weighted. So it's sort of presupposing that the highest risk to your hearing is coming from sound in the mid to high frequency region. And yet, if you look at the typical spectrum in a live sound setting, it's so heavily bass dominated, and then it just tails off almost linearly as you go up to higher frequencies. So in a live setting, you get this absolutely enormous dose of low frequency sound exposure that the A weighting curve just almost completely ignores. And we still don't really know how relevant that is, what the impact is. Do we need a separate limit relating to the low frequency exposure? So lots of things on a fundamental level, lots of research questions that still need answering. And then on the practical level, research has a really important role to play in determining what works, both at kind of technical levels, like what type of acoustic treatments are helpful in the real world, what works at a more of a sort of policy, regulatory level. A lot of rules and guidelines are introduced with good intentions, but whether people can follow them, whether they do follow them, whether there are sort of unintended consequences of that. There's the classic example that got talked about quite a lot in the development of the WHO work was, to whom do you show the measured sound level and when? Because if you put it on a big display screen for the audience to see, you invite the sort of competition to see who can be loudest type effect, which is definitely counterproductive to the purpose of this initiative. So there are all sorts of questions at different levels that we need answers to. And hopefully your minds are sort of starting to turn to some of the questions that you've had in your own hands-on experience.
I think I'll throw this one out there, maybe this observation before we move on to the next bit. But I think our industry has a unique challenge in that the sound and noise that we make isn't a byproduct. It's not like we're running a factory where the fact that it's noisy is just a side effect of having to use all this machinery. For our industry, the noise we're making is the product. It's what people are paying to see. It is what we're doing. So when you consider, especially on the noise pollution side, we can't follow noise control basics, because noise control basics would say, okay, control the noise at the source, but that would just mean turning off the speakers and not having a show, which defeats the purpose for us. So I think, again, we're uniquely challenged in this area because the noise we're making is what we're selling. It's what people are coming to see. So it's finding this very difficult balance of, as Ian is saying, making sure the audience isn't overexposed to sound. And in my mind, that is very much based on sound system design and acoustic design of the venue or events. I think it has to start there. And then if that's not possible, consider making hearing protection available, of course. But then on the noise pollution side, I mean, what are the innovations that we can support through our research network? I know there have been some interesting applications in the past. There's certain companies who have done, again, some encouraging things, but they're not doing those things anymore. I think there's loads we can do on the noise pollution and on-site sound exposure side. But again, I think we're at this unique position where all the sound that we're making is on purpose. It's not a byproduct. It is the product, which I think sets us apart from other industries in many senses. So now I suppose the question is, what can you do? How can you get involved with this? And there's loads of ways to get involved. So as I said, it was the beginning of this year when we formally launched the HELA Research Cooperative. It's not this exclusive academic club that you get with a lot of research networks. This is meant to be driven by outside of academia, really, but supported as appropriate within academia to make sure that we have meaningful and well managed research projects. Formally, within the Research Cooperative, there are three groups. So we have the Research Board, Industrial Steering Group, and Outreach Group. I mean, Ian is one of the leaders of the Research Board. So I don't know, Ian, do you want to take a minute or two to talk about the Research Board and what that consists of?
Sure, yeah. So I'm the vice chair of the research board, and Eleanor Shabalina is the chair of that board. So we are the group that sort of is responsible for, as it says on the slide here, identifying what we think the research priorities are in these areas. And Adam, I don't know if you plan to talk about the sort of themed funding calls and sandpits that we're doing. Is that
Yeah, I'll cover that later.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, looking to see what research we think is needed, but at the same time, we don't want to be too prescriptive here because we want to be led by proposals from outside of our small group. So whilst we're sort of identifying opportunities and steering things a little bit, we very much want to remain sufficiently open that whatever relevant research people are doing relevant to the HELA themes, that's still going to be eligible for funding. And then we haven't had our first funding call released just yet, but we will do imminently. And then the research board will also be responsible for organising the independent review of the funding proposals to sort of make sure that they're eligible and to rank them in accordance with their quality and their priorities.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So that's the research board. We also have the industrial steering group, which is typically manufacturers and other members of industry that are directly linked to the live event industry. So I believe Marcel is in the room. Marcel Koch is one of the leaders of this group, along with Joss Mulder, who's based in Australia. But the idea is that this group is there to provide industrial insights, primarily from a manufacturer or other company point of view, just to make sure that the research projects that we are supporting and encouraging are relevant to their needs and align with where they see the industry going. So again, this group meets, I think, at least every other month, and then are communicating directly with the research board to make sure the priorities are in alignment with what's needed. But perhaps the most important group out of the whole research cooperative is this outreach group, which is run by Sam Kuth, who's at the University of Manchester, and Laura Sinnott, who's an audiologist based in the US. Now, the outreach group is for everyone else. So it's for anyone who is a stakeholder in the live event industry. So that may mean sound engineers who are out there doing the gigs. It could mean audience members. As Ian was saying, in the medical side of research, these days they're bringing in patients to have a voice in the research. And I think, we've done a bit of that in the past, surveying audience members and bringing them into the fold. But I think we need to do more of that because ultimately they're the ones that our industry exists for. So I think we have to have a very good understanding of what they like and what they don't like, what they want more of and what they want less of. So getting audience members involved. From a noise pollution standpoint, talk to members of the community, bring people into the fold who live near venues. I'm sure that they would love to have their voices heard. And in a way, having their voices heard probably helps the situation already because they have a perceived control over the situation. But we need to get those inputs and understand how perhaps some research can help improve their quality of life when events are going on. On top of that, talking to local authorities, talking to non-audio related elements of the sector. So talking to lighting and video and staging, rigging, event management, promoters, bar staff, security staff. All these stakeholders have a voice to be heard. And historically, these groups are not really represented in research at all. And I think that's where this can make for something different, something where we're putting research projects out there and supporting them in a way that it has meaningful change on the industry and helps the industry in a positive way, not in something like, oh, great, the academics have turned up. Now we have to slow down the whole production to let them do their measurements and do their surveys, which is in many cases the reception that we get. When Ian and I rock up at a big festival in India, it's kind of a bit of eye rolls, crossed arms, like, all right, here we go. We want to change that a bit. So ultimately, all of you in this room are absolutely invited to get involved in a project proposal. So as Ian alluded to, we're going to have 3 funding calls. So we have a pot of money that can support a certain number of projects. They're not looking to be kind of ground-breaking projects, projects that absolutely change the world overnight. These are more pilot studies, exploratory studies, feasibility studies, just to see if an idea has legs or not. But the 3 funding rounds consist broadly of the first one, which will be released in June and close at the end of July, which focuses on site research projects. So by on-site research projects, I mean projects related to sound system optimization, related to acoustic optimization, audience sound exposure, and learning more about that. All things related to anyone working or attending an event on-site, so the people who are there. So that is our first funding call. The second funding call, off the top of my head, I think is planned for late summer, early autumn this year. And predictably, that involves off-site topics. So we're looking at things like sound propagation modeling. Can we improve that? Noise pollution analysis, annoyance thresholds, research into that to better understand what really annoys people and what triggers them when they're trying to enjoy the space of their home. An event kicks off, what causes them to pick up the phone and make a complaint. Where otherwise, maybe we could switch that around and convince them that it's maybe more of a positive thing that this is happening. So that second funding call is all about the offsite things, and it could involve as well elements of sound insulation and isolation, so things we can do either domestically or to music venues to help control the spread of sound. And like I already said, kind of better understand how sound propagates in different meteorological conditions. And then the final funding call, which will be very early in 2027, is more of an anything goes. Any topics that weren't covered in the first 2 funding calls, or anything that's come to mind since those 2 funding calls, it's sort of free for you to submit whatever you like there. Now, the requirement for the research cooperative to put a proposal in is that we expect all proposals to have a member of the team who's an academic, a member of the team who is involved in industry, such as from a manufacturer, and have someone involved, at least one person involved in the proposal who kind of fits more into that outreach group. It's more of just a stakeholder, someone who works at live events or attends live events. And the idea there is that we're trying to encourage greater connections between all the different areas in what we've been talking about. So building connections between academia and industry and end users, and academia and end users. And I think that's, if we can get anything out of this research cooperative, it's that. It's better communication and collaboration. Now, if you're not an academic or not a member of industry, it could be a bit daunting to say, well, I don't know any academics. How do I meet them? And that's something that we can facilitate. If you have an idea that you think is worthy of being explored, or if you just want to be involved and figure out what interesting ideas are out there, that's something that we can facilitate within the leadership of the research cooperative. We can pair you up with academics and get you involved in research projects if you do so choose. So it's really just a matter, it's sort of on all of you to reach out and tell us how you'd like to be involved, whether it's coming up with the ideas or leading a research project or just inputting as necessary. But it's really the intention to get broad, wide-spanning teams in place to make interesting research and meaningful research. I'm sure I've missed some things in there, Ian. Do you want to fill in the gaps?
Well, it's just one slight addition, small addition, which on the back of what you've just said, just to remind people that we're going to have research sandpit events, which are all about forming these connections, building networks, and sort of brainstorming, and then from there developing the proposals for funding. So don't feel that to get involved you need to have done all of this work in advance and have come up with your polished proposal for funding. The HELA Research Co-op is the vehicle for kind of putting people in touch and co-developing ideas, and there will be specific events and resources available to help with that.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Now, I'll throw one spanner in the works here, and this is a requirement that I have to state as part of the funding that we've received for this. The catch is that for every project, the person who's submitting that proposal has to be based in the UK. And that's because the funding has effectively come from UK taxpayers. So the person clicking the submit button and leading the project submission has to be UK based. Looking at the room, I know a lot of you are internationally based. No need to worry. But if you're requiring a connection to someone in the UK to join your team, reach out to me or Ian or anyone else involved in HELA. And we have quite good networks here in the UK, so we can get you in touch with the right person. From just a general participation point of view in the projects, you can be anywhere in the world. So that doesn't matter at all. As long as you're a resident of Earth, you can contribute to this. But you just have to have a UK friend who's willing to pull the paperwork together and click the submit button, if that makes sense. But that's kind of the one catch, is that you've got to deal with the British. That's it. That's all I really wanted to talk about. I think we've covered what we needed to cover here. I've put a QR code on this final slide that takes you to the HELA Initiative website, which has been recently expanded to cover both our education side of things, which is the HELA certification. If you're not HELA certified yet, take a few hours out of your time to do so. I think it's a good thing to do. And eventually, this website will have features like a discussion forum for the research side. So if we're brainstorming ideas for good projects, that'll be a good place to go to bounce ideas off of each other and maybe build up groups of interested parties. So stay in touch. You can register your interest on the website to stay on our mailing list if you create an account. But at this point, I'd just like to thank you all for stopping by today, taking the time out of your lunch break to join us. And I think we probably have about 10 minutes if there are any questions. So you can either pop a question into the chat, or I think we probably do have the mechanism to unmute your microphone if you prefer talking to typing. But yeah, over to you if you have any pressing questions at this point. Otherwise, we'll turn it over to Ian, who's going to sing us a tune.
Now, you said you were the one that enjoyed screaming into the microphones, Adam. That is never something that I did. It was always a guitar amp doing the screaming in my case.
Yeah, I could talk into a microphone, but I don't sing. You don't want to hear me sing. At least we got Dan excited. Right, if there's no pressing questions, that's absolutely fine. I would hope that you'd all consider getting involved in the research co-op in one way or another. Like I said, if you need introductions to get the right people to kind of facilitate your ideas and make them a reality, do get in touch. You can reach out through the email that's indicated on the HELA website. But yeah, don't shy away from research. I think this is something that we can all contribute to, regardless of where you're coming from. And I think there is an opportunity here to really start to plug this gap in maybe lack of research on the hands-on side of the industry. So I think it's an exciting opportunity. I see we've got a couple of people typing in the chat, so yeah, we will stick around for a few more minutes. Or maybe they're just saying thank you. We'll give you a minute to type. If it's more efficient, you can raise your hand. And I think Sarah is still on hand who can unmute your microphone to let you talk instead of type. Yeah, so Kit has asked about when the funding will be allocated and when research will need to commence. For the funding, our first funding round will close for applications at the end of July, and we're looking at a 2-month turnaround for the reviews. And then once the outcomes are presented, so if we'll be looking at September sometime, then we're saying the research should be commencing within 2 months of that. So you'd be looking at towards the end of this year if you're successful in the first funding call. And we would expect the research projects to be done no more than 9 months after being awarded the funding. I think ideally we want it to fit within a 6-month window, if that makes sense. See, Thomas, you momentarily put up your hand. Oh, it's up again. Let's see if we're able to unmute your mic. You should be able to unmute now.
There, yes.
Yep, we've got
Hello.
you.
Hi, thank you for very good information. For me, it's because I haven't done like this kind of research before, and me being like a acoustic consultant and doing like sound measurement on the festivals in the summer. How is the like with the funding? Is it because what I'm kind of thinking about would happen during during the festival season, which means, you know, like needing extra hands and stuff, which is also kind of yeah, could be kind of expensive. How is the funding and the numbers? Did you make like a budget when you?
Yeah,
And is there a cap on what can, like, how much funding is available?
yes, there absolutely is a cap. What we're doing at the moment is we're going to work out kind of what our maximum per project is going to be. It'll be on the order of probably between 40 and 60,000 pounds, British pounds. But essentially, when you put in your funding bid, we would expect some idea of how that funding will be allocated, how it will be spent. So you do need to budget for it, you know, whether it's equipment or time, you know, or other resources. Yeah, that should be accounted for.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's part of the, yeah, when you apply, or yeah, then you just make your budget and then you will, yeah. But yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for the
that's
information.
correct. Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Okay, let's see. Dan's thanking us. Thanks, Dan. Looking forward to having you at one of the sandpit sessions, definitely. Andy has no escape. He's involved in this already, so we'll definitely be speaking soon. All right, well, if there's no other questions, Andy's laughing. Yeah, there's no escape. We'll wait for Nicholas to finish typing unless he's just thanking us. But otherwise, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Like I said, go to the HELA website and register an account so we can keep you up to date on where we're at with things, and especially when we have these funding calls announced formally, then you'll be the first to hear about it, so you know when you can start putting your applications together. But yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what projects you come up with, and really excited to see what comes of this. So thank you very much. Any parting words, Ian?
No, thanks everybody for coming. Looking forward to working with you all.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.